Hi, I'm Steve Hurd. I'm a professor of biology at the University of New Brunswick. That's in Fredericton, New Brunswick, Canada. I'm an evolutionary ecologist. I mostly study plants, insects, and the interactions between them. And today I'm really happy to tell you a little bit about where I am and how I got here. I hope this will be interesting. Let's go. So how does one get to become an academic? People often talk about how they were inspired to the career path they're on. I have to say that I don't remember ever having a moment of inspiration. What I do remember was that as an undergraduate, I loved the surroundings of the university. I loved being with people who wanted to learn things. I loved being able to find new things out. I loved that we could just be curious. We could find out things regardless of whether they mattered economically, but just because there was a mystery to be solved. I loved that as an undergraduate, and so I went to grad school to do more of it. Loved it even more. And I was busy. I worked hard. Of course, there were downsides, but ultimately I stayed in grad school, became an academic, just because of the things you can do, the way you can spend your working time trying to figure out new things about nature, trying to figure out things no one's ever known before, and being with other people who feel the same way. That's, I guess, what got me to be an academic, and that is what led me to stay an academic through my career, which is about 30 years now. I've been a professor here at UNB for 21 years. I was a professor before that at the University of Iowa for 7 years, a postdoc and grad school before that. That's a long time in academia, but boy, it's sure been fun. There are multiple paths people take to get into academia. I had a very boring one. I was the completely conventional kind of student that people think about when they picture someone becoming a prof. I did an undergraduate degree, I did a PhD, I did a postdoc, I applied to lots of faculty jobs, I got one, I wrote my first grant, published my first paper, all of that stuff. It was a very linear path. Didn't really feel like it at the time, because I don't think I really had a well-defined plan for how I was getting where I was getting. But in hindsight, it was a pretty straight line, very conventional. And that's something that I don't know if I regret it, but I've become aware now that lots of folks take more interesting paths into academia. Some people work for a while in industry before or after the graduate degree. Some folks work in government or nonprofits doing research and then come to academia. Some folks, of course, stay in government or nonprofit jobs or industrial jobs and do research, although they aren't maybe technically in academia. They're colleagues nonetheless. They're part of the same academic enterprise. So I guess while I had a path to academia that was ordinary, straight, boring, really, I now understand that there are lots of ways to get here, and I'm really happy that I work with colleagues who have taken multiple different paths to the academic job we now share. It's great. Well, I mentioned earlier that I really like academia. I like my job. And there's a couple reasons for that. In fact, I've written about it being the best job in the whole world. And there are some things about academia that are just fantastic. Oh, there's lots of little things. I like sort of being my own boss. I like having flexible time, all those sorts of things, sure. But there are two things that are really some of the best things you can possibly have, I think, in a job. One of them is that my job, the core of my job, or a big piece of it, is to find out things about nature that no one knows. And that means that sometimes when things go right, for a little while, I have a new result, a new experiment, a new piece of analysis, and for a moment, I understand something about the way the world works that no human on Earth understands except me. No one's ever understood except me. I know something at that moment. I know something about the world that Darwin didn't know, that Einstein didn't understand. I know something that nobody ever has known before. And that is an amazing feeling. It's so exciting. It doesn't mean that I'm smarter than Darwin or smarter than Einstein. Far from it. It just means that I have advanced the field of human knowledge a little bit in a way that they didn't, that no one has. And I know a thing nobody else knows about the way the universe works. Wow. Well, that's one thing. But there's a second really cool thing, and that is that the next thing I do in my job is I tell other people about this new thing I understand. And so I get to share my knowledge of how the world works with other folks. And actually, it's not just the new knowledge that I've come up with. I get to share all the knowledge that we've collectively come up with as scientists with other people. That's teaching. It's publishing research. It's all kinds of things like that. And boy, if there's one thing that's better than learning new things about the world, it's got to be telling other people the things we've learned. It's fabulous. That's why I love academia, is those things, research and teaching, are the core of what I do and what universities and academia are for. It's fantastic. Over my career, I've done a lot of different research. Maybe too much. I'm sort of known for having very short academic attention span. But what I do now, mostly, is the ecology of forest pest insects. I'm interested in how insect behavior, insect diet, and insect evolution have affected the way that forest pests interact with the trees in the forest and everything else in that forest ecosystem. In particular, my students and I worked on things like the biology of invasive forest pests, why some invasive forest insects spread quickly across the landscape while others don't. I've been interested in the extent to which forest insects are diet specialists, feeding on one or a couple species of tree instead of being host generalists and feeding on everything, and how that comes to be and why it matters. And most recently, I've been working on something that's a little broader. I've been working on the impact of an important forest pest here in Canada, something called spruce budworm. It's a caterpillar. The impact of that pest on soil carbon storage, which is really important for the control of Earth's climate. When budworm outbreaks comes every 30, 40 years to huge populations over millions of hectares, defoliates and kills millions of trees, what does that do to the forest's role in putting carbon into soil, taking it out of the atmosphere, moving it into soil? We don't know the answer to that, and that's really important because these forest pests act on huge scales in the world. In Canadian boreal forests, millions of hectares. This could be a very large control on carbon dioxide in our atmosphere, and we know almost nothing about it. So I have colleagues who work with me on this, which is good because here I am working on soils and forests and carbon, and none of those things are things that I really know a whole lot about. But I have colleagues from the Canadian Forest Service and from Agriculture Canada and from other universities who help me understand what we're doing in this new system. And I'm excited to be able to work as part of that kind of team to learn new things about that. That's sort of the ordinary science I do, but I'll say that I also do what I think of as weird science. You might think of it as science studies. I'm interested in the way science works, the way we as scientists do our jobs, the way we publish, the way we share our results. And so, for example, I've been interested in understanding the effect of the way we construct paper titles on how those papers have impact. In particular, we were able to show that that funny paper titles actually lead to higher impact for the papers that they decorate. I've been interested in how it is we turn our attention to study one species rather than another. And I've been able to show that, surprisingly, the etymology of the species' scientific name, at least for some insects, has an effect on whether or not those insects get studied. That's really amazing. It's the intersection of human psychology, I guess, and the history of science. And so I have a lot of fun doing these bits of weird science when I'm not doing my plant insect evolutionary ecology. One of the things academics often struggle with is keeping up with recent literature. How do you do that? Well, I may be strange here. I think it's not possible. I think you can't. I think that's not actually a bad thing. And I have to admit that I don't try to keep up with the latest literature. And here's why. It's not that I don't ever read the literature, don't get me wrong. But you often hear the process of science described as read up to see what we know about something, find a gap in our knowledge, design an experiment to fill that gap, and then publish. And that's what you'd think the process was if you read the introduction of a paper, because that's always how the introduction is structured. Here's what we know, here's the gap, here's how I filled it. But if you read all the literature before you design the experiment you want to do, before you do the science you want to do, I think there's far too high a risk that you'll get sort of sucked in to whatever the consensus of the day might be. And there are a lot of things, I think, that if you read the literature, you'll become convinced that we know, but that in fact we don't. And if you read the literature first, you may simply accept what's there. And you may not do an experiment that later became really important. I'll give you a really simple example, maybe not the world's most important example. I did a bunch of experiments years ago asking how suspended particles in a stream mix across the width of that stream. That is, if you add particles at a point, maybe a pollutant, maybe a nutrient, how fast do they mix across the entire width of the stream? I did a whole bunch of experiments with tracer dyes and things like that, and found the answer. It takes a surprisingly long time. It takes, even for a stream only a meter across, it takes tens to hundreds of meters to mix that stuff across the width of the stream. If I had read the literature first, I would never have done the experiment, because the literature is really clear on this. The literature says that small streams are turbulent and therefore well mixed. If I'd read that literature, I would have said, oh, okay, I guess particles mix quickly across the stream. No science to be done, nothing to be done here. I would have never done the work. It's not that you shouldn't read the literature. I just think you should avoid reading too much of it before you figure out what it is you're curious about, what it is you want to do. It's a bit of a fine line to walk. You don't want to ignore what's been done before. You don't want to repeat mistakes other folks have made. You don't want to spend a lot of time on something that really is well understood. But you also don't want to let the literature constrain the way you think about the world. So my approach is sort of to try not to read too much literature in the early stages of doing some new science, but then to read a lot and do a lot of careful searching after, when I've got some experiments that are sort of partly done, and now I want to see how should I interpret these data, how does what I've done fit with everything else. I don't know if that strategy would work for everybody, but it's worked for me. Over my career, I've done a lot of different things. And I'm actually sort of at the end of my research career, towards it. I'm retiring, although I'll still be doing science. It feels like a bit of a transition, and that makes you think about what you've done that you're most proud of. And I don't quite know, but there's two things I'll mention. In terms of research, my own research, I would point to a paper I published actually as a PhD student, one of my very first papers. And it was a paper that wasn't part of my thesis. It wasn't even remotely related to what my thesis was about. It was a study of the shapes of phylogenetic or evolutionary trees. If you think about an evolutionary tree, let's say you have 4 species. You have humans, chimps, gorillas, and orangutan, and you want to draw the tree that shows the relationship between that. That tree could have 2 different shapes. It could split at the base 2 and 2, and then each 2, of course, split 1 and 1. Or it could split at the base with 3 species on one side, 1 on the other. The 3 could split 2 and 1, and then of course the 2 would split 1 and 1. So those are what I would call balanced and unbalanced or imbalanced evolutionary trees. And I was interested in the extent to which real phylogenetic trees were balanced or imbalanced, depending on the methods we used to reconstruct them, and compare it to a model where every species through evolutionary time is equally likely to split. Now, it's a little bit technical, don't worry about it. What I'm proud about with that paper is that I asked a question then, this was in the early 1990s, that nobody else had asked. In fact, I don't think anyone thought it was a sensible question to ask. And I did a bunch of work basically combing through journals looking for published evolutionary trees, measuring their shape, and then come up with a model of what trees would look like under the case where all species have equal speciation rates. Showed they were different, and just really by chance happened to publish that a couple of years before a lot of people got interested in the same kinds of questions around the shapes of trees. And so that paper, partly because that paper became very influential, partly by accident, just because of the timing, but partly I think because I had a pretty creative idea and was able to follow it up. So I'm really proud of that paper. If you asked me at the time, would this paper become one of my most cited papers, I would have had no idea. But in hindsight, I'm proud of that one. But I must say that what gives me the most satisfaction, so I guess I'll say I'm proudest of, is actually not my own research. It's actually my other kind of work, my other kinds of writing. I have a blog. I've written a couple of books, but in particular, I'll point to my guidebook for scientific writers. It's called The Scientist's Guide to Writing. And that book, I didn't realize as I was writing it. But again, hindsight's wonderful. I now understand that book, which has been out in the world for, what is it now, 7 or 8 years, has gotten into the hands of hundreds, thousands of graduate students, postdocs, young faculty. And I hear people tell me that it's helped them a little bit with their writing. And the thing is, if I can help hundreds, thousands of people each, a little tiny bit, with their science, with their publishing their science, that probably has a bigger impact on progress of science in general than any paper I could write myself. And so, to the extent that that book has been useful for folks, it makes me so happy because I've realized that I can do more for science by helping out a bunch of folks younger than me, earlier in their careers than me, than I could ever do myself, hunched over a microscope or tromping through a field site. Not something I would have thought early in my career, but now that knowledge that I've done something that's helped a lot of people, even if a little bit each, helping a lot of people is a great feeling. I've worked with a lot of students over the years, both undergraduate students and graduate students. And it's one of the most fun things. And one of the things people often wonder is sort of how you get those students enthused about work, how you inspire them to do science. And there's a couple of answers. For a lot of students, and for most grad students, you don't have to. A lot of students have passion and curiosity and drive, and it's wonderful to see that. And all you have to do is facilitate it a little bit. For grad students, all you have to do is is give them a little bit of freedom to do the science they're interested in, to support them with a bit of equipment and supply to answer their questions. But you don't have to fire them up because they are. That's fantastic. Not everyone's already fired up, though, about science, and that's maybe especially true in the undergraduate classroom, especially if you teach, first or second year courses, maybe that everyone has to take. And there, I think, is a different kind of thing. There, I think we maybe can't expect to say the thing to a student that will turn them on and make them excited about science. Because I don't know what that thing is. What you can do is you can just let it show how excited you are about science. And so I don't make any secret of the fact that I think nature is really cool, that natural systems work in ways that are complex but wonderful, that there are powerful ideas like evolution by natural selection that can explain complicated features of our universe that otherwise might be baffling. And if I can be enthusiastic about that, if I can show my excitement about that in a classroom, then I can hope the students who see that will let themselves feel that way too. For a lot of students, it doesn't seem cool to be excited about science, about knowledge, but a lot of students want to be. And so I think part of my job as a teacher is to just give them permission to be excited what they're doing, and maybe infect them with a little bit of my own excitement about science. I work at the University of New Brunswick. It's a mid-sized university. It's not in a huge population center. It's not the first place you think of when you think of a big research university. It's not Harvard. It's not Oxford. But I love it. And what I love best, I think, about where I am is not the buildings, the equipment, or the university's reputation. It's simply the people I work with. I've found a place where I work with colleagues who are fantastic, enthusiastic, smart, engaged, and I've found friends too, often the same people. It makes a huge difference. If I could go back in time and tell my sort of younger self some things, and I'm thinking now not my teenage self. I don't know what to tell my teenage self. He was hopeless. But if I go back in time and tell my grad student or postdoc self some things, I think one of the things I would say is we often get kind of excited about chasing the obvious big thing. Gosh, wouldn't it be great to have a job at Harvard? Gosh, wouldn't it be great to have a multi-million-dollar lab with hundreds of grad students? Gosh, wouldn't it be great to win a huge prize? The thing is, I don't think it is that great, because I haven't done those things. But what I tell myself, I think, is that what matters most is finding a place and finding a job and finding a niche for yourself where you can be happy, where you can feel like every day it's a privilege to come in, work, and to work with the people you work with, to see the people you see in the lab, in the hallways. That is wonderful. Could I have wound up somewhere else with millions of dollars of research funding and a huge lab, room for dozens of students? Yeah, maybe. But I've been really, really happy in my sort of middle-sized university where I work with people who enjoy what they're doing, who have time to sit and chat, who take time with their families, who make themselves and me happy about being in academia. It's great. So I'm glad I discovered this. And as a grad student, I spent lots of time maybe applying for positions and awards and so on that might have looked great on a CV, but maybe wouldn't have made me quite as happy. So I guess just to recognize there are many, many, many ways to make a contribution to science, There are many ways to have a career. There are many places you can be, kinds of things you can do, roles you can play. And finding the role that satisfies you, finding the place that makes you happy is probably as important as anything. Thanks for spending time with me.